Today we take up one of the most beloved episodes in all of the original series, Shore Leave.
Compliance, the final frontier. Tom Fox is the voyager of trekking through compliance. His mission? To explore the original series and seek out and share what it can teach you about compliance. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
Episode 15, Shore Leave, Stardate 3025.3. An Earth-like uninhabited planet in the Omicron Delta region seems the ideal location for rest and relaxation for the tired crew of the Enterprise. However, strange things start happening when the crew beams down. McCoy sees Alice and a white rabbit. Sulu sees an antique police special pistol. Yeoman Barrels is accosted by Don Juan and Esteban Rodriguez, and Angela see birds. No one believes McCoy's Alice sighting until Kirk beams down and spots a giant rabbit track. Kirk cancels shore leave for the rest of the crew, but is then confronted with practical joker Finigan from his days at Starfleet Academy on the one hand and his former girlfriend Ruth on the other. Meanwhile, Sulu has been attacked by a samurai, Rodriguez and Angela have been confronted by a tiger, and Bones is making moves on Yeoman Barrels, who has found Princess's clothing. Spock, meanwhile, reports from the Enterprise that he has detected a sophisticated power field on the planet which is draining the Enterprise's energy. Spock beams down to help investigate just as communications with the ship are becoming impossible. Pleasure over seeing Barrels dressed as a princess soon turns to terror when Bones is lanced by a knight. After Bones is skewered, Kirk shoots the knife with a gun he has confiscated from Sulu. Investigation of the knight shows him to have the same cellular structure as plants on the planet, and Spock surmises that it has all been manufactured. A Japanese Zero plane then strafes Angela and Rodriguez, fortunately missing them. During the commotion, the bodies of the dead knight and McCoy mysteriously disappear. After asking Kirk what he was thinking about prior to encountering Finigan, Spock realizes the apparitions are created out of the minds of the landing party. Upon thinking about the Academy again, Kirk conjures up Finigan and heads off on a wild chase after him. After Kirk catches up with Finigan, Finigan then lays him out flat. After more hand-to-hand fighting, Kirk finally succeeds in doing something he has never done before, defeating Finigan. Suddenly, the planet's caretaker appears with a repaired McCoy on the arms of two cabaret girls from Rigel 2. The caretaker apologizes for the misunderstanding and offers the services of the amusement park planet to the Enterprise's weary crew. Kirk accepts and authorizes the crew to beam down, but Spock has had his fill of shore leave and requests to be returned to the Enterprise. So, what are some of the fun facts of this case? Composer Gerald Fried based Finnegan's theme on an Irish jig he heard during the climactic fight scene between John Wayne and Victor McLaglen in the classic movie The Quiet Man. If you recall, that fight scene, it was really quite spectacular. It took up a good 5 minutes at the end of the film. Shore Leave is one of the most beloved episodes in all of Star Trek. It has raucous action. It has fun. It has historical references. It has romance. It has fairy tales. It has a white rabbit. It doesn't get much better than that. But there's really a lot to unpack in here, I think, that can really help you in your overall compliance program. And the starting point, of course, is fun and games. And how do you incorporate that type of action, that type of part of your brain into your overall training? A friend of mine I asked him about how does he get such great training engagement. He says through games. And he said, what was your most favorite part of school? And I said, recess. He goes, exactly. And if you can incorporate something like that into your compliance training and your compliance programming and communication, I think you'll have really a leg up to get increased engagement and increased focus. Once again, you've got, I guess the only thing missing here was a white rabbit, or excuse me, the Cheshire Cat, because we did have a white rabbit. We had knights in shining armor. We had Don Juan. We had strafing runs. We had a police 37 or a 38 caliber police revolver that Mr. Sulu was somewhat of an expert in addition to his fencing that we learned a little bit earlier. And it's in a great location. This planet is just gorgeous as well. Shooting outdoors is not typically something we see from Star Trek, so it's fun to see how they incorporate fauna and flora into this episode, and they use both. We got to meet Ruth briefly. Unfortunately, we don't get much of her story in the entire Star Trek canon. A couple of times she's mentioned. Finigan, of course, is a great stereotyped Irish character, but he's also the one that whipped Kirk, or as he calls him, Jimmy Boy. So lots of fun in this episode, some serious points too, but I really would ask you to think about the gaming angle. And is there a way for you to have games to help teach some pretty basic or even important compliance tactics, strategies, and goals to have greater engagement with your audience? So think about shore leave, think about recess at school, and think about gaming in your compliance training and your communications. Next up, compliance takeaway. What are some of the compliance takeaways from this episode? I think the first one really involves Kirk and Finigan, and that's when you see a fact from your past. You cannot interpret it as simply that, a fact from your past. You must interpret it in light of your current situation. Kirk cannot understand why Finigan could still get the goods on him after all of these years. And at the end, as Finigan points out, Jimmy Boy, I'm 25, just like you remember me. So the fact that Kirk didn't recognize this really led to him taking a pretty severe beating. And when he finally changed up and realized that he had to go with the facts on the ground, then he was able to overcome Finigan, which indeed was what he wanted to do all of those years anyway. But for the compliance practitioner or the chief compliance officer, I think that means you need to interpret facts based upon current day experiences, and particularly around the data that you receive. Simply because someone does something or something appears one way and that's the way it's appeared in the past does not mean that you're tied to that interpretation going forward. And clearly, if you have had unethical behavior or even behavior that went up to the line of unethicalness, then you will need to consider that as a factor going forward. That's indeed the basis of red flags. Remember, a red flag does not mean that you cannot do business with someone. It simply means that additional research must be done to clear the red flag. But even if you can't clear the red flag, you should recall that it's simply an enhanced risk. And if you have an enhanced risk, you can have an enhanced risk management strategy. Typically around third parties would be the prime example of this, but there can be other examples as well. So when you see a fact from your past, interpret it in light of current experience. And that current experience might be that you have an enhanced ability to engage in a risk management strategy. That really leads to point number 2, which is, what is a risk? The Japanese Zero, which appeared and strafed Rodriguez and Angela. Angela asks, is it dangerous, the plane flying above them? And Rodriguez says, no, it's not unless he goes on a strafing run, which of course is then what the plane proceeds to do. If the plane was flying at 5, 10, 20,000 feet or anywhere in between, it may not have been a danger to Rodriguez and Angela. However, when it went on its strafing run, then they had to turn tail and run. So what is a risk is one thing a risk at 5,000 feet and another thing at 50 or 100 feet. You bet it could be a different risk. So think about that. Think about what is a risk. Think about how risks change. And then the final point is at the end of the episode where the caretaker basically invites the crew of the Enterprise to come down on shore leave with an appropriate set of warnings from the captain. And it just goes to show that as a CCO, sometimes you're going to need to have some fun, and you can have the rest of your team have fun too. I hope you'll join me tomorrow where we will take up episode 16, the Galileo 7.
If you enjoyed this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, you can help it grow by sharing it with the biggest Trek fan you know.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.